Alrighty, I am pleased to be joined by a reoccurring guest, Nicely from the Ball Fake podcast. How's it going, Nicely?
Not too bad, JJ, and yourself?
I'm doing great. Again, thanks for coming on. Before we start talking about the NBA season, if you kind of want to talk about more about your podcast, I know you've came on a few times, so the listeners kind of know who you are. But if you want to talk more about your podcast and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm the host of the Ball Fake podcast, available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple any other podcasting platforms. We're getting ready to start revving up with some more of our interviews and stuff. There's recently been a podcast on the rise called the Pick a Side podcast. We're gonna have one of their co-hosts come on the show. We also have plans of bringing on some potential NBA players onto the show. I don't want to disclose the names just yet, just to make sure that they're going to be available at a certain time period. But it's going to be a big month in 2022 with January, February, and March full of interviews and stuff like that. So,
All right, sounds awesome. Definitely keep an eye on that. I'll begin to put all the links down in the description below. All right, start with the NBA season. Is there anything that's really surprised you this season?
I think the emergence of the Memphis Grizzlies has definitely been something that
Mm-hmm.
definitely caught my eye. I mean, Ja Morant, in his third year, I expected him to emerge as an all-star. I didn't think that he was going to necessarily jump into this MVP caliber player. I actually, as one of my dark horses for the award. But him with Desmond Bane, they have a great supporting cast. Desmond Bane, I mean, he's a guy that went from 9 points per game. He's averaging 17 currently right now, 42% from beyond the arc. Jaren Jackson has been great on both ends of the basketball. I would love him to give them a little bit more production on both sides. The offensive end, just mix it up inside out. And obviously Dylan Brooks, he hasn't been in the lineup too often. He's kind of up and down sometimes, but I love his defensive capabilities. I think one day he could potentially make one or two all NBA defensive teams. But they're well coached, they're way ahead of their rebuild schedule, and they're 4 games back from first place in the Western Conference. So the Memphis Grizzlies is the biggest surprise in the NBA to me.
Yeah, and the Grizzlies, the nice part about them, they're really young and stuff like that, fun to watch. And the Western Conference has been weird this year because it's all kind of everybody's kind of you normally see the Western Conference a little more, spread out, but it's kind of all jumbled this year. It's kind of weird. But yeah, the Grizzlies are definitely a team that you need to keep your eye on. Let's talk about one of the big stories right now, of course, is Kyrie Irving. He's playing. But he can't play home games yet. I did hear some rumors that there's a chance that the Nets might actually pay his fines if he can actually play home games. But let's start with this. With Kyrie Irving playing and only can playing away games, do you think that's a distraction for the Nets as a team?
Well, I mean, as far as a distraction, they're always going to have attention around them, just given the names on the roster: Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving whenever he's available. But I think the only thing that really is going to be an issue is probably, him possibly disrupting the players like a Cam Thomas, Patty Mills. Like I'm a little bit concerned about him. They're playing him a little bit more than they would like to. And we've even seen that with Kevin Durant, but obviously if Kyrie Irving is going to be there, he's going to alleviate that. But I think honestly, I don't even know if Kyrie Irving, being able to play home games issue. I mean, defensively on the perimeter, I know they just shut out the Bulls the other night, but defensively on the perimeter, they're a little bit up and down. I mean, I like guys like DeAndre Bembry, but Bruce Brown, he's taking a step back. He's not really getting the amount of minutes that he wants. Patty Mills, I feel like he's being a little bit overworked. And James Harden, I mean, he's been lackluster all season. He's had national televised games where he's been able to, put up some pretty big numbers. I think he just had a triple-double against Chicago the other night. But, I mean, and not to mention, you have Kevin Durant being the anchor of your defense, and you would like guys like Nicholas Claxton and, some of their other interior presence to be a little bit more effective. And I think Nicholas Claxton can be that guy, but, he's just going to have to go through a few growing pains. But I think they have more issues other than the Kyrie Irving thing, so to speak.
And with what all the Nets have had to deal with, and I think Steve Nash has done a pretty good job having to deal with all that, do you think he deserves to be, or at least the front runner for Coach of the Year? I know it's really early, but do you think he needs or deserves to be in the top for the running for Coach of the Year?
I think, you know what? I didn't even think about that. I mean, they are the third best team in the Eastern Conference.
Mm-hmm.
Given all the issues that I just listed off, I think you probably should give him that consideration. He's a second-year head coach, dealing on the team: James Harden, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, like I mentioned. And despite all the distractions, despite all the negatives that have happened this season, he's still been able to, kind of coach this team to the best of his ability. And, they're sitting towards the top of the Eastern Conference. So, yeah, I would probably consider him one of the top coaches in the NBA perspective.
Well, the thing about the Nets too is I think it was during Christmas time, like all their players were either on the COVID reserve list or just out injured. So I think what they have done, and again, they still have a chance because I just checked the standings, and of course, this is recorded on Saturday night, and I think the Bulls have the number one seed, but they have a barely lead over. I think I'm trying to think now, the Bucks, Nets, and Heat, and think that might be the way how the top four goes, but the East is more competitive than I thought it would be this year. So that's interesting. But let's go a little bit more back to the Kyrie Irving thing. Do you think there's still a chance that Kyrie Irving, despite not being vaccinated, do you think there's a chance of him actually playing home games, maybe in the postseason?
I mean, you would think that he wouldn't be able to, but I mean, we also didn't necessarily, not too many people are optimistic about him being able to play at all this season, given his stance on the vaccine and everything. So, I mean, it's really a toss up. You never know. I mean, how much can, Kevin Durant and these other guys kind of influence, the front office to make that decision? I guess it might be, it's up to Sean Marks at the end of the day, but I really just don't know where I'm at in those terms. But I did hear some rumors about, them not being able to actually do that. I know you mentioned earlier that they could pay some fines, but I don't know. I've heard some rumors that they weren't allowed to do that, given it's a federal law. So we're not going to figure out until April comes around the corner. So
yeah, it's definitely going to get interesting. And it's just, I mean, even if Kyrie Irving can't play home games, I mean, the Nets are still that talented where they can still win the championship easily, at least in the or at least in the Eastern Conference. Let's jump over to the West real quick. And we were talking about this before we were recording, and this kind of sounds a little bit like a stretch. They started talking about this earlier in the year, but I'm not sure it's actually going to happen. But if the Lakers don't make it far in the playoffs this year and get beat in the first round again, do you think there's a chance that Frank Vogel gets fired or just part ways with the Lakers?
I don't think there's a big chance of that, honestly. I mean, he won you a championship just 2 seasons ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many times has a championship coach really gotten fired, especially this soon into his contract? But I think if LA does make a decision like that, you would have to have a particular coach in mind, and research on what coaches are available that I think would mesh well with this unit. Russell Westbrook, Anthony Davis, LeBron James. I wasn't really able to come up with anybody, so to speak. So I think that is something that we have to take note of. And then on top of that, Jeannie Buss, she does have a really good relationship with Frank Vogel. And like I mentioned, I honestly feel like, a lot of the pressure and a lot of the heat that maybe Jeannie Buss in the front office deserve, because if we're being honest, they haven't really given him the greatest personnel for him to really coach his from his perspective, right? Vogel's one of the better defensive coaches in the entire NBA. I mean, just 2 seasons ago, the Lakers were number 1 in defense. And even last year, even though they fell apart, they were number 2 in defense. And now you're seeing them towards like the bottom half of the league from that perspective. And I think that's more a testament of, the lack of good decisions that the front office has made, as opposed to, Frank Vogel's coaching just in general.
Yeah, and I think another part why their defense isn't quite as good is because, of course, Anthony Davis is still out, and there's a chance that he comes back in late January or something like that. So that's another big thing as well. Let's stay with the Lakers a little bit. There's been talks about Russell Westbrook getting traded because it just doesn't seem like it's working. Do you still think he's with the Lakers by the time the trade deadline ends?
Yeah, I mean, with Westbrook, it's just such you just don't know where to even start, right? I mean, obviously he's definitely regressed as a player individually, well below league average in terms of shot attempts at the rim. From a field goal percentage standpoint, we understand he's not the best jump shooter in the entire NBA. He likes the mid range, but shooting mechanics aren't great, so to speak. Doesn't have soft touch, kind of shoots the ball on the way down. And, the turnovers have been daunting. And I know a lot of people have been giving him praise about not turning the ball over so much, but I actually would much rather Russell Westbrook to be aggressive and turn the ball over in that process than him not to be aggressive at all. 0 turnovers a game, because it's just not who Russell Westbrook is as a player. But I doubt that he gets traded. I don't think there's too many teams that are necessarily looking for his services, especially at this time during the year, given the fact that, most of these backcourts are kind of settled in. But yeah, I think it's very unlikely you see a Russell Westbrook trade by the trade deadline.
And another point guard that's not playing right now, and he plays similar to Russell Westbrook, and it's John Wall. And it seems like I don't think he's played at all this year, and the Rockets are trying to work out a trade with him. But do you think he or do you think he gets traded by the trade deadline, or do you think there's maybe a chance that Russell Westbrook and John Wall get swapped? I mean, what do you think about John Wall's future for the rest of the season?
John Wall's an interesting one. I think he's one of those guys that's probably going to get bought out at some point. Not necessarily sure if that'll be this season or next season, but how many years he has left on his contract, so to speak, or
I am not sure. I think he probably has at least 2 years, maybe 2 or 3 years at least, because he signed a massive deal a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see him being traded to. I mean, he's kind of like you mentioned. Him, Westbrook have the same issues, so to speak. Not too many teams are really looking at guys like that right now. But yeah, I doubt you see a John Wall trade. You're more likely to see a Westbrook trade than a John Wall trade at this point. But we'll just see.
Yeah, I mean, they both play very similar. They're both really athletic, but yeah, John Wall has just been injured the last few years. And of course, he's with the Rockets, and the Rockets are one of the worst teams in the league. But we'll see what happens there. This is kind of an odd question right now, but it looks like the Clippers aren't going to have Kawhi for the rest of this year. They're not going to. It looks like Paul George could be shut down. And say the Clippers do make the playoffs, and somehow Kawhi and PG are able to come back. And say they're like a 7th or 8th seed. Should the Clippers try to see what they can do? Or should they bring Kawhi and PG back, or just, keep them on the bench and hope to have a better next year?
I wouldn't be too optimistic about that. I think if you're the Clippers, I think you let some of these local Martinsons of the world, BJ Bostons, let those guys kind of develop. Terrence Mann, allow him to continue to develop, grow confidence this season. Use this year as a development year. You don't really have too much to play for, especially if they could potentially fall into like that play-in category. There's not going to be too. I don't think with the teams that for the Western Conference, they can compete with them as of right now. And you also have to bring into consideration that Kawhi Leonard, he hasn't played all season. I understand Paul George, you've seen him for some time this year, and he at some point was playing at an MVP level. But, with Kawhi Leonard, you still kind of have to rekindle the chemistry with him and some of those guys on the roster. And judging by the fact that, he's coming off of a very gruesome injury, I would just much rather you wait, have him rehab this offseason, and, just prepare him for next year.
Yeah, and they just brought him back too last year. I think it was like a 4-year, $179 million contract. Might have been 189 or 179 or 189, so somewhere around there. So they still have him for a few more years. But yeah, as much I'm a huge Kawhi Leonard fan, but I feel like it's not worth it to go out, and especially if they're a 7th or 8th seed, why even try to rush it? They're going to be a lot better next year when Kawhi and Paul George are both healthy. And another question too, and I mean, this is kind of an obvious question right now, but who do you think the MVP is right now if the season ended today?
I have to go with Kevin Durant just because I mentioned, some of the Nets issues earlier in the episode, and I think he's been the one guy that I MVP level consistently, right? Not to say that guys like Jokic and Giannis and Stephen Curry haven't, but I mean Curry, I originally had him as the front runner. The Golden State Warriors, they were the best team in the NBA at one point. They had a really good streak going, looked really unstoppable, but as of late, since Curry's record-breaking 3-point record, he hasn't really looked like himself. And I think Kevin Durant, given the fact that he's got so much responsibility on the Brooklyn Nets with James Harden not playing up to his standards. The issues with Kyrie Irving. Defensively, he's kind of got to be that anchor alongside guys like Nicholas Claxton. And he's been dealing with a lot of stuff as well. And he's still been able to, allow the Nets to be one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. I would feel more comfortable saying Kevin Durant is probably the MVP of the season if it were to end today.
Wow. Yeah, I honestly thought you were going to say Curry, but I'm glad you said Durant because Durant makes a lot more sense for the MVP. But and I put this on a poll question earlier today. And who do you believe Steph Curry is the greatest shooter of all time, or do you think a guy like Ray Allen or Reggie Miller is still the greatest 3-point shooter of all time?
I almost feel like you could break it down into categories. Like I think Ray Allen, he's right up there with him, just in terms of like if we're shoot, I think Ray Allen is top. But it's the fact that Curry can hit you from all angles, catch and shoot. He can score off the dribble from that perspective. He's got the range. Ray Allen, we didn't really see him throw too many 40-foot bombs out there like that, given his era, obviously. But I think, it's probably obvious that Stephen Curry's there, given all of those dynamics.
Yeah, and the thing too is that even the NBA, 10 years ago when Ray Allen was playing, and I guess he wasn't necessarily in his prime 10 years ago, but it was completely different. I mean, they shot threes, but not like what they do today. So, I mean, it's hard to judge. And I still think Ray Allen's a little more clutch than Curry is because Curry's been with a really good team. But I mean, Ray Allen was too, but I don't know. I feel like Ray Allen had a little more clutchness to him. But
and
anyways,
he also didn't have the opportunity to shoot 13, 14 a game.
Yeah.
Like he didn't necessarily have that type of role on his team to where he was able to do that. I really wonder what he would accomplish had he played a little bit in this era. But I mean, we'll just never know.
And it'd be interesting to see Reggie Miller do the same thing in our era. Like I think he was one of the best shooters before Ray Allen came on the scene. So we'll see what happens. Another question too. Ben Simmons has yet to play at all this season. It doesn't look like he's going to play. He wants out of Philly, but I'm not sure that's right now being the whole drama right now. But do you think Ben Simmons actually plays this year? And do you think he ends up playing with the Sixers or with another team?
I think with the Sixers, it's out of the door. It's out of the window. I mean, that relationship is broken. I mean, Daryl was going to have like a really good shot of getting him back on court. They were able to get him within the facility, got him tested for COVID and everything. I'm not sure if he's vaccinated or not, but I would assume he is, given that, that hasn't really came into I haven't been hearing any reports about him being unvaccinated. But I mean, the likelihood of any team trading given Daryl Morey's asking prices, I just don't know where I'm at right there. I think you have a much better chance of trading for Ben Simmons in the off season, given the season's going to be over. Teams, there might be some teams looking to move on from some of their pieces. I mean, a team like Atlanta, they've obviously been trying to get into the Sixers for right reasons. Ben Simmons, he would be a really good fit on the Atlanta Hawks alongside guys like Trae Young and the rest of those young assets that they have. But I just don't think that, there's a lot of teams out there that really have the pieces that Daryl Morey's aiming for. He's wanting this all NBA caliber player. He's really telling people that he wants regard in return. But I mean, there actually have been a few teams that I feel like kind of were giving you like fringe all-stars, but Daryl Morey, he's not buying it. And he's kind of one of those tough GMs to negotiate with. I've heard rumors about him being very difficult in the past, but I mean, take that for whatever it's worth. But I doubt you see Ben Simmons play this season.
Yeah, the drama has just not been even before. I think it was before the season started. You could tell the drama was there, and I mean, Ben Simmons is a good player, but I think the Sixers made a mistake of placing him as the point guard. I think he should have been a 3 or 4, but that's another discussion. That was with a totally different organization. I mean, Daryl Morey wasn't there. Doc Rivers wasn't there at the time. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with Ben Simmons, but I feel like he would thrive in a smaller market where there's not as much pressure on him. I mean, I think earlier and this is a really big market, but I think earlier before the season started, there was rumors of him going to Golden State because the pressure wouldn't be on him. It'd be on Curry or whenever Klay Thompson came back. But I think he'd do much better in a smaller market. So, I mean,
I mean, given his playoff blunder last postseason, he's going to have pressure wherever he goes, regardless, right? But I think if you stick him he's maybe not getting too much attention on a nightly basis, he's probably going to have a much better chance of thriving within that organization and, just being a little bit more comfortable. Now, it depends on where you send him to and the personnel of that team and whether or not they're going to decide to, build around Ben Simmons or, make sure that he's really comfortable in that situation. But we're just going to have to wait and see on that one.
Yeah. And I'll definitely be excited or breaking news if he does end up getting traded or if he actually plays this year. Another guy that's finally back is Klay Thompson. It's been 2 years and now he's finally played a few games. What have you thought about his performance so far?
I actually burst from Cleveland, given they don't have great perimeter defense. And their interior defense is what they pride themselves on, obviously. But Klay Thompson shooting well below league average. I think he's shooting below 40% from the field. He's shooting like 27, 22% from three, something like that. I mean, it's You haven't played basketball in 2 years. Golden State looks a little bit different versus what they looked like last time you were shooting up on the court. And obviously, he's just going to have to work his way into game shape. I think he looks pretty healthy as of right now. My biggest concerns are probably going to be him turning corners. We know Golden State likes to run a lot of pin downs. They're hell bent on their pistol action and hammer screens and things of that nature. It's a lot of stuff going on off ball, but they haven't really put him in too many scenarios where he's going to have to be sprinting cross court side to side and doing all that good stuff. They're sending him a lot of short pin downs, giving him the ball in isolation, which is something I think is a little bit interesting in. They should probably look to do that a little bit more often, even when he, March comes around and he's starting to feel a little bit more like himself. But I expect him to pick it up around March, end of February. And, I think Golden State has a lot of things to be optimistic about heading into, the postseason this year.
Yeah. And I think when Klay Thompson came back, that, of course, was breaking news and stuff like that. And I think it had even been over 2 years, like 2.5 years or something. So,
like
yeah, I mean, the team's
41 days.
Yeah, it was crazy. And plus, like you said, excuse me, the Warriors are a completely different team than when he played game 6 of the NBA Finals. So, I don't know. All right, so you said the Memphis Grizzlies were your most surprising team. What about the most surprising player? What player has been really good that you definitely didn't see coming?
Jalen Brunson out of Dallas. He's been on a tear. He's actually the player that they were requesting to bring in to play alongside Luka. Guy that can run your offense, not be too ball dominant. Luka operating in a pick and roll. And although Luka's had a quiet year and he got off to a slow start, given he just never comes into training camp in shape. Jalen Brunson, he's been able to alleviate the pressure off of him. He's averaging 16 points per game currently. This is a guy that around 11, maybe 12, 13 points per game originally. Efficiency wise, he's not there just yet. I mean, he's still a very young player. He's got some things to tweak within his game and all that good stuff. But what he's been able to do at 6'1" defensively it's astonishing. And I think he's probably, to me, individual wise, out of everybody in terms of the NBA this season.
Yeah, that's a good one. What about the rookies right now? What rookie have you been really impressed with? I know Evan Mobley's been great this year. Cade Cunningham really doesn't have much to work with in Detroit. Jalen Green at times has been good. I mean, what rookie has really impressed you this year?
There's been a number of guys, especially as of late. I haven't been able to watch too many of their games, but Franz Wagner out of Orlando, I would like to see. I got to do a little bit more research on him. I'll be honest. I've watched probably 2 to 3 Magic games, and those are by 2 quarters or something. And picking up on this year is obviously Scotty Barnes. He's a lottery pick. We expected him to be really good, or at least I did. I wasn't surprised that Toronto took him over Jalen Suggs, given, Toronto, they're one of the few programs in the entire NBA. They run this 1 guard, 3 wings lineup that might include a center. So, he was also might have been insurance for a guy like Pascal Siakam. We know he was on the trade block all last year. But, outside of Scotty Barnes, I think Evan Mobley, he's also been somebody that has actually surprised me. I wasn't too optimistic about him. I had questions about his motor. I thought he was a little bit slimmer, and I didn't really understand how athletic. But I think he's a really good passer, especially within Cleveland's offense right next to Darius Garland. You can play him high-low with Jared Allen. He's been able to find guys in the in the short corners and things of that nature on kickouts and stuff. But, he's a really good prospect, and we have to be very optimistic about Cleveland's future.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been able to say that outside of LeBron. So now I forgot what I was going to say. But anyways, oh, yeah, that's right. Toronto has been kind of a team that I'm a little surprised by how good they are. They're actually a borderline playoff team. Washington is kind of the same way, but of course they got a lot from the Russell Westbrook trade. Toronto has been great. We'll see what happens. But yeah, Evan Mobley's been a player that's impressed me. I know he's missed some time because he's either in the COVID protocols or I think he was out with an elbow strain for a few weeks. So that's been definitely what I've been watching. And surprisingly, again, in Cleveland, I didn't expect them to do well. And of course, Orlando, it's kind of hard to watch those games because they're never usually on, big time network. But yeah, I mean, that's a good one to bring up. I know this is really early. This is kind of similar to the MVP prediction, but if the season, or Do you have a finals projection?
I do actually. We've been talking about a lot. We've been talking about the Nets a lot this episode, and I'm gonna bypass that for right now. I think the Milwaukee Bucks make it out of the Eastern Conference this year. I think it's pretty obvious in the West who come out. Phoenix. No, I'm playing the Golden State Warriors. But no, yeah, I think it'll be Milwaukee versus Golden State in the NBA Finals. I think that's an interesting matchup too because I feel like a lot of people don't really take into consideration how versatile Milwaukee is. I think in order for you to win the championship in the NBA, these be one of those teams that can adapt to anything, right? Whether it's offensively, defensively, and that's in terms of being able to play big lineups, small lineups. I think Milwaukee is one of the few teams in the NBA, along with the Golden State Warriors, that can really, do stuff like that, right? And they have one of the better small ball lineups in the entire NBA, featuring Chris Middleton. Some of their shooters, maybe a Bobby Portis and Giannis Antetokounmpo playing at the center position. And given Golden State, is also one of the better small ball lineup teams in the entire NBA. But I think they have strong and taller wings that can bother a lot of other small ball lineups defensively, especially in the Western Conference against teams like maybe Phoenix, Memphis. I think there's a lot of optimism there, but I think, the NBA Finals prediction for me this year is probably going to be Milwaukee versus Golden State. But that is subject to changing depending on what happens within these next couple months. But I think I feel pretty confident about that prediction.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with you there. And I mean, there's still a lot, like I said, there's still a lot of basketball left to be played. But at the end of the day, usually you kind of have an idea on who's going to play and who's not going to be in. Before we end the interview, and again, thanks for coming on nicely. I forgot about this, but the Knicks make a trade for Cam Reddish. What did you think about that trade overall? Were you shocked? I mean, what was your reaction to it?
I mean, that's a really good free agency pitch to Zion Williamson. I will say that. But I was surprised that Atlanta gave up so little, right? I mean, I guess they were really not feeling him within that locker room. They've been having issues for like the last 2 seasons. I mean, John Collins, he's been clearly on issues with Trae Young last year. And I think Atlanta's one of the few teams in the NBA that I feel like they have the talent, but it might be too much talent. So it made sense I knew they were going to have to give up one of those guys, right? Cam Reddish is, I think, he's got a little bit of Paul George within his game. I'm not saying he's going to be the next Paul, but I think, him going to New York, an organization that's looking for, an exterior scorer, somebody that can be a little bit versatile, do it all, be reliable from that standpoint. I think he can grow into that. He wasn't really able to showcase that too much, given Trae Young is very ball dominant and, he didn't really have the ball in his hands too much and not necessarily getting the amount of opportunity that you might have liked if you're a Cam Reddish fan. But I think there's a lot of optimism about him being in New York, especially playing alongside RJ Barrett. I think those two are going to be a really fun tandem. I have questions on whether or not, Julius Randle, he's going to be able to want to share the ball with, some of these young guys like that. And we know Thibodeau, I feel like a lot of people aren't taking this into consideration, but, he's heavily reluctant on his veterans, right? So hopefully there's no issues about Cam Reddish not getting minutes early on. And hopefully, he can work within the rotation and be one of the assets that, Tom Thibodeau favors within the near future and everything. But I think there's a lot of optimism in New York. But the Kevin Knox situation, I mean, I just don't know how to feel about Kevin Knox, right? I think he's got a little bit of potential. There's some things that you can be optimistic about within his game. He's got really good intangibles. He's long wingspan, very athletic. But I just don't know. I haven't really seen him too much. So, but I thought it was interesting that Atlanta gave Cam Reddish up for him rather than maybe a player like from OKC or Detroit, maybe. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. And I was a little surprised too by the trade, but I felt like Atlanta, they had to probably trade one of those guys. And of course, Cam Reddish. They definitely don't want to trade Trae Young. They definitely probably don't want to trade John Collins either. So we'll see what happens there. But again,
they didn't do a great job in terms of, didn't mean to cut you off, but they didn't do a great job in terms of just identifying their talent, right, and their worth, right? They booked up a lot of guys this offseason, and now they're starting to regret that. But hopefully Atlanta can make a turnaround. I thought last year they overachieved. I didn't actually a contending team in the Eastern Conference. And we even saw that a little bit with the New York Knicks. They played really hard in the regular season, but come postseason, they just laid an egg. Didn't have a lot of offensive power within the organization and things of that nature. And I think Atlanta, they kind of drew a good card, right? The new Knicks, their issues. Philadelphia was one of those teams that I understood was probably going to sit towards the top of the Eastern Conference, but I felt like their offense was a little bit. I didn't like the scheming around Ben Simmons and Embiid, and obviously the spacing is a little bit awkward. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the Sixers beat themselves more than the Atlanta Hawks beat the Sixers. If I'm being quite honest, I think a lot of people forget that there was games where Joel Embiid and Steph Curry were the only ones that scored in the second half. They blew an 18-point lead. I think they blew a 26-point lead as well. I mean, if you just clean up your act within those games, you probably win 4-2. But I mean, that's just my opinion. But I think Atlanta's really good. I think some good quality pieces. Hopefully they can get the right head coach in there. I don't know if Nate McMillan's guy. You're starting to see some of the same issues that he had within Indiana here in Atlanta. Hopefully, they can make stuff work.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. And again, there's a lot of basketball left to be played. But again, thanks for coming on nicely. Before we end the interview, do you want to say anything more about your podcast? Anything like that?
Just to make sure to check us out on Ball Fake Podcast. I have a co-host with me, Greg King, and we also have some other people that come on as co-host guest appearances as well. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all other podcasting streaming platforms. But yeah, make sure you guys just support the channel. We're trying to make sure that we have a really good year this year and, just grow our brand overall.
All right. Again, thanks for coming on. Again, the links will be down in the description below. Hopefully this comes out Sunday morning, at least the audio version, and the video comes out soon, Sunday or Monday. So again, thanks for coming on nicely and have a wonderful night.